The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her rifle for what felt like the thousandth time. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool dawn air, and her hands trembled slightly as she positioned herself behind the massive Barrett M82 rifle. Around her, fellow soldiers whispered among themselves, some offering encouragement while others shook their heads in doubt. Sarah had been trying to make this shot for 18 months. 18 long, frustrating months of failure, ridicule, and determination that bordered on obsession. The target stood 4,000 meters away, a distance that seemed impossible to most people. To put this in perspective, that was nearly 2.5 miles away. The target appeared as nothing more than a tiny speck on the horizon, barely visible even through the most powerful scopes. General Morrison had been watching Sarah's attempts with growing impatience. A man known for his iron will and zero tolerance for what he considered wasted resources, he had made his feelings about Sarah's quest quite clear. Just last week, he had pulled her aside after another failed attempt. "Mitchell," he had said, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of military experience, "you're embarrassing yourself and this unit. No one has ever made a confirmed kill shot at 4,000 meters. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history was 3,540 meters, and that was achieved by a Canadian sniper with perfect conditions and years of experience. You've been at this for over a year, wasting ammunition and training time. It's time to accept reality and focus on achievable goals." Sarah had stood at attention, her jaw clenched as she listened to the general's words. She had heard similar speeches from instructors, fellow soldiers, and even some of her friends. But something deep inside her refused to give up. She had always been different, always pushing boundaries that others accepted as immutable. Growing up in rural Montana, Sarah had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her father, a former Army Ranger, had taught her that shooting wasn't just about pulling a trigger. It was about understanding wind patterns, humidity, temperature, elevation, and a dozen other factors that could affect a bullet's trajectory over long distances. He had also taught her something else, that the impossible was simply the untried. When Sarah enlisted in the Army at 18, she had quickly distinguished herself as an exceptional marksman. Her scores on the rifle range were consistently among the highest in her unit, and she had a natural ability to read environmental conditions that impressed even veteran snipers. But conventional success wasn't enough for her. She had heard stories about the theoretical limits of long-range shooting, about the mathematical possibilities that existed beyond what had been achieved in real-world conditions. The 4,000-meter shot had become her obsession during a training exercise in Afghanistan. Her unit had been positioned on a mountain ridge, observing enemy movements in the valley below. Through her scope, she had spotted enemy combatants at extreme range, far beyond any reasonable engagement distance. While her teammates dismissed the distance as impossible for accurate fire, Sarah had begun calculating wind speed, elevation adjustments, and bullet trajectory. That night, she had spent hours working through the mathematics of such a shot. The physics were incredibly complex. At 4,000 meters, a standard sniper round would take approximately 4.5 seconds to reach its target, assuming perfect conditions. During that time, the Earth's rotation would actually affect the bullet's path, a phenomenon known as the Coriolis effect. The bullet would drop significantly due to gravity, requiring massive elevation adjustments. Wind could push the bullet dozens of meters off course. Temperature and humidity would affect air density, changing the bullet's velocity and trajectory. Most experts considered shots beyond 3,000 meters to be more luck than skill, requiring perfect conditions and a considerable amount of chance. But Sarah saw it differently. She saw variables that could be calculated, environmental factors that could be measured and compensated for. She saw a challenge that was difficult, but not impossible. When her unit returned to base, Sarah had approached her commanding officer with a request to begin training for extreme long-range shooting. The request had worked its way up the chain of command, eventually reaching General Morrison's desk. To everyone's surprise, he had approved a limited training program, perhaps more out of curiosity than belief in the project's feasibility. The training had begun with conventional long-range shooting, gradually extending distances as Sarah demonstrated proficiency. She had quickly mastered shots at 1,500 meters, then 2,000 meters. At 2,500 meters, her accuracy began to decline, but she could still hit human-sized targets with reasonable consistency. At 3,000 meters, she was hitting perhaps one shot in 10. Beyond that distance, her success rate dropped to nearly zero. The months of training had been physically and mentally exhausting. Each practice session required hours of preparation. Sarah had to study weather conditions, calculate wind speeds at multiple elevations, and account for atmospheric pressure changes. She had worked with ammunition specialists to select the optimal rounds for extreme range shooting, settling on .50 caliber match-grade ammunition with carefully controlled powder charges. The rifle itself had required modifications. The standard military sniper rifle wasn't designed for such extreme ranges. Sarah had worked with the base's weapons specialists to install an enhanced barrel, improved trigger mechanism, and specialized scope with advanced ballistic calculation features. The final setup weighed nearly 40 pounds, making it more of a precision instrument than a conventional weapon. But despite all the preparation, all the calculations, and all the equipment modifications, Sarah continued to miss. Shot after shot fell short, went wide, or sailed high over the target. Each miss was analyzed, environmental conditions were recalculated, and adjustments were made. But the target at 4,000 meters remained untouched. The failures had begun to take their toll. Fellow soldiers who had initially been supportive started to lose interest. Some began to openly question whether the entire project was a waste of time and resources. Training officers suggested that Sarah focus on more practical skills. Even her friends began to gently suggest that perhaps it was time to move on to other challenges. General Morrison's patience had been wearing thin for months. He had allocated significant resources to Sarah's project, including specialized ammunition that cost over $50 per round, dedicated training time, and the expertise of several weapons specialists. The base's ammunition budget was tight, and every round Sarah fired at the impossible target was a round that couldn't be used for conventional training. More concerning to the general was the impact on unit morale. While some soldiers admired Sarah's determination, others saw her obsession as a distraction from more important military objectives. Training schedules had been disrupted to accommodate her practice sessions. Equipment that could have been used for standard training had been monopolized for her project. The general had also been facing questions from his superiors about the unconventional training program. Military budgets were always under scrutiny, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to justify the resources being devoted to what many considered an impossible pursuit. There was growing pressure to shut down the project and redirect Sarah to more conventional assignments. Sarah was fully aware of the mounting pressure. She could see the skepticism in people's eyes when she walked past. She heard the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. She felt the weight of expectations and the burden of proving that her belief in the impossible wasn't simply delusion. But she also felt something else, an unshakable conviction that the shot was possible. Every night, she reviewed her calculations, studied weather patterns, and analyzed the variables that affected bullet trajectory at extreme range. The mathematics consistently showed that under the right conditions, with perfect execution, a bullet could accurately travel 4,000 meters and strike a target. The challenge wasn't just technical, it was deeply personal. Sarah had built her identity around pushing boundaries and achieving what others considered impossible. Her father had always told her that the difference between successful and unsuccessful people wasn't talent or luck, but persistence in the face of repeated failure. He had taught her that every missed shot was a learning opportunity, every failure a step closer to success. As she prepared for another attempt on this particular morning, Sarah tried to block out the doubt and negativity surrounding her. She had spent the previous evening studying weather forecasts, wind patterns, and atmospheric conditions. The morning showed promise: light winds, stable atmospheric pressure, and clear visibility. If she was going to make this shot, today might be her best opportunity. She adjusted her position behind the rifle, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon against her shoulder. The scope's crosshairs danced slightly as she tried to acquire the distant target. At 4,000 meters, even the slightest movement was magnified exponentially. Her breathing had to be perfectly controlled, her muscle tension minimal, her focus absolute. Behind her, she could hear General Morrison arriving for what she suspected might be his final observation of her attempts. His footsteps were measured and deliberate, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. Sarah knew that if she failed today, there might not be another opportunity. The general's patience had limits, and those limits were rapidly approaching. The weight of 18 months of failure pressed down on her shoulders as she prepared to take aim. 18 months of missed shots, disappointed observers, and mounting criticism. 18 months of questioning her own judgment and fighting against the growing belief that perhaps everyone else was right, perhaps the shot truly was impossible. But, as her finger moved toward the trigger, Sarah felt a familiar surge of determination. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to give up now. This shot represented more than just hitting a distant target. It was about proving that human potential had no fixed limits, that persistence could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, and that belief in oneself was sometimes the most powerful weapon of all. The morning air was still, the target was clear, and Sarah Mitchell was ready to either achieve her dream or face the reality that some challenges are truly beyond human capability. The wind meter in Sarah's hand showed readings that made her heart race with possibility. 3 miles per hour from the northwest, with minimal gusting. After months of dealing with unpredictable wind patterns that could shift dramatically during the 4.5 seconds it would take her bullet to reach the target, these conditions were nearly perfect. Sarah had learned that wind was perhaps the most challenging variable in extreme long-range shooting. Unlike gravity, which was constant and predictable, wind could change direction and speed at different altitudes along the bullet's trajectory. A bullet fired at such extreme range would travel through multiple layers of air, each potentially carrying different wind patterns. She had studied meteorology textbooks, learning about wind shear, thermal columns, and atmospheric layering that could affect projectile flight. General Morrison positioned himself about 20 meters behind Sarah's firing position, his arms crossed and expression stern. He had been fielding increasingly uncomfortable questions from his superiors about the resources being devoted to Sarah's project. Just yesterday, Colonel Peterson from headquarters had called asking for a detailed report on the training program's progress and costs. General, Colonel Peterson had said during their conversation, "I'm looking at ammunition expenditure reports that show Specialist Mitchell has fired over 400 rounds of match-grade .50 caliber ammunition in the past 6 months. At current prices, that's over $20,000 in ammunition alone. Add in the specialized equipment, training time, and personnel hours, and we're looking at a significant investment with no measurable return." The general had defended Sarah's project, but he knew his position was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. Military budgets were tight, and every dollar spent on Sarah's seemingly impossible quest was money that couldn't be used for conventional training that produced measurable results. The pressure to shut down the program was mounting, and today's session might be the last chance to demonstrate any progress. Sarah carefully adjusted her rifle's position, making minute changes to ensure perfect stability. She had learned that at extreme range, even the smallest movements could result in massive deviations at the target. Her rifle rest had been customized with micro-adjustment capabilities, allowing her to make incredibly precise positioning changes. The bipod legs had been replaced with adjustable models that could compensate for uneven ground down to fractions of an inch. The scope mounted on Sarah's rifle was a masterpiece of precision engineering. Unlike standard military optics, this scope had been specially modified for extreme range shooting. It featured multiple elevation turrets, advanced ballistic calculation capabilities, and reticles designed specifically for long-range shooting. The magnification could be adjusted from 12x to 50x, allowing Sarah to clearly see the target at 4,000 meters while also providing the precise aiming points necessary for accurate shot placement. But the most crucial modifications were the ones that couldn't be seen. Sarah had worked with the base's ammunition specialists to develop custom loads specifically for extreme range shooting. Standard military ammunition was designed for reliability and consistency at conventional ranges, but extreme long-range shooting required different priorities. The custom rounds used carefully selected powder charges, precision-weighted bullets, and cases that had been measured and sorted for perfect uniformity. Each round cost nearly 3 times as much as standard ammunition, and the loading process required hours of meticulous preparation. The bullets were weighed to ensure they varied by no more than 1/10 of a grain. The powder charges were measured using precision scales accurate to tiny fractions. The cases were inspected for flaws and sorted by weight and dimensions. Even the primers were selected for consistency and reliability. Sarah had also spent countless hours studying the external ballistics that govern bullet flight at extreme range. She had learned that a bullet's trajectory at 4,000 meters was affected by factors that were negligible at shorter distances. The Coriolis effect, caused by the Earth's rotation, could deflect a bullet several inches at extreme range. Air density changes due to temperature and humidity could significantly alter bullet velocity and trajectory. Even the ambient temperature could affect the rifle's barrel, changing the way bullets exited the muzzle. The mathematical calculations required for such shots were incredibly complex. Sarah had developed spreadsheets and used ballistic calculation software to account for every variable she could identify. She had studied physics textbooks to understand the principles governing projectile motion at extreme range. She had consulted with aerospace engineers about the effects of atmospheric conditions on high-velocity projectiles. But, despite all the preparation and calculation, success at extreme range ultimately came down to execution. Sarah had to control her breathing, minimize muscle tremor, and time her shot to coincide with her natural respiratory pause. She had to squeeze the trigger with perfect consistency, applying rearward pressure without disturbing the rifle's aim. She had to follow through after the shot, maintaining her sight picture until the bullet reached the target. The mental game was equally challenging. Sarah had to maintain absolute focus for the several minutes required to properly set up each shot, while blocking out the distractions and pressure around her. She had to trust her calculations and equipment while accepting that factors beyond her control could still cause a miss. She had to maintain confidence in the face of repeated failure and growing skepticism from observers. As Sarah settled into her final shooting position, she began her pre-shot routine. She had developed this routine through months of practice, creating a systematic approach that ensured she addressed every variable before pulling the trigger. The routine helped her maintain consistency and gave her confidence that she had done everything possible to ensure success. First, she checked the wind meter one final time, noting both speed and direction. The conditions remained favorable, light winds with minimal gusting. She consulted her ballistic chart, confirming the elevation and windage adjustments for current conditions. The calculations showed she needed 47.5 minutes of elevation adjustment and 3.2 minutes of windage correction for the northwest wind. Next, Sarah verified her rifle's position and stability. She made small adjustments to the bipod legs, ensuring the rifle was perfectly level. She checked the scope's mounting, confirming that the reticle was properly aligned. She tested the trigger, ensuring smooth operation without excessive take-up or over-travel. The target itself was a standard military silhouette, sized to represent a human torso at 4,000 meters. Through her scope, it appeared as a small dark shape against the lighter background. At maximum magnification, she could make out the target's outline, but it was still incredibly small. A miss by just a few inches would result in a complete failure to impact the target area. Sarah controlled her breathing, taking several deep breaths, and then settling into her natural respiratory pause. At this point, her heart rate was elevated from adrenaline and anticipation, but her breathing was controlled and steady. She had learned to time her shots to coincide with her natural respiratory pause, the brief moment between exhaling and inhaling when her body was most stable. The crosshairs settled on the center of the distant target as Sarah began applying pressure to the trigger. She had practiced this trigger pull thousands of times, learning to apply steady rearward pressure without jerking or yanking. The trigger was set to break at exactly 2.5 pounds of pressure, providing a clean, consistent release. Behind her, General Morrison checked his watch and made notes in his ever-present notebook. He had been documenting Sarah's attempts for months, recording conditions, adjustments, and results. The data showed some progress in terms of shot grouping and consistency, but no hits on target at 4,000 meters. His report to headquarters would need to show measurable results to justify continuing the program. The general was aware that several other military units had been following Sarah's project with interest. Long-range shooting capabilities were becoming increasingly important in modern military operations, where engagements often occurred at extended distances. A confirmed capability to engage targets at 4,000 meters would provide significant tactical advantages and could potentially save lives by allowing friendly forces to engage threats from safer distances. But capabilities that existed only in theory provided no practical military value. The general needed concrete results, confirmed hits at extreme range under documented conditions. He needed proof that the training program was producing real-world capabilities rather than just expensive experiments. Sarah's finger continued its steady pressure on the trigger as she made final sight adjustments. The crosshairs drifted slightly in the gentle breeze, requiring constant micro-corrections to maintain proper sight picture. At extreme magnification, even her heartbeat could cause visible movement in the scope, making precise aiming incredibly challenging. The moment of trigger break approached as Sarah applied the final ounces of pressure. She had reached the point of no return, where the trigger mechanism was about to release and send her bullet on its 4.5 a half-second journey to the distant target. All her preparation, all her calculations, all her months of training would be tested in the next few seconds. The rifle fired with a thunderous crack that echoed across the training range. The massive muzzle blast kicked up dust and debris around Sarah's position, and the rifle's recoil drove back into her shoulder with tremendous force. Through her scope, she watched as the bullet began its long arc toward the distant target, knowing that success or failure would be determined by factors largely beyond her control during the next 4.5 seconds. General Morrison raised his binoculars, focusing on the distant target area where a small puff of dust should appear if Sarah's bullet found its mark. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness as everyone on the range waited to see the results of another attempt at the impossible shot. The bullet flew through the morning air, its trajectory carrying it higher than a 15-story building at the midpoint of its flight path before gravity pulled it back down toward the distant target. During its flight, the bullet would lose more than half its initial velocity due to air resistance, and its path would be affected by every environmental factor Sarah had tried to calculate and compensate for. As the bullet neared its target, Sarah held her breath and maintained her sight picture, following her training to observe the results of her shot. In a few more seconds, she would know whether months of preparation and calculation had finally paid off, or whether she would face the possibility of having her project terminated due to lack of results. 4.5 seconds felt like an eternity as Sarah maintained her sight picture through the scope, watching for any sign of impact at the distant target. The mathematics of her shot played out in real time as the bullet traveled its predetermined path through the morning air. At this extreme range, she had calculated that her bullet would reach a maximum height of nearly 400 feet above the target line during its flight, following a parabolic arc that seemed to defy logic. General Morrison kept his binoculars trained on the target area, his experienced eye scanning for the telltale dust cloud that would indicate bullet impact. Around the firing line, other soldiers had gathered to witness what many believed would be another failed attempt. Some checked their watches, timing the bullet's flight, while others whispered among themselves about the futility of the exercise. Sergeant Williams, Sarah's primary training instructor, stood silently behind the general. He had been supportive of Sarah's project from the beginning, but even his faith was being tested by the months of failures. Williams had 30 years of military experience and had trained hundreds of snipers during his career. He understood better than most people the incredible difficulty of what Sarah was attempting. The bullet continued its journey, now traveling at significantly reduced velocity due to air resistance. At extreme range, atmospheric drag became a major factor affecting projectile performance. Sarah had calculated that her bullet would lose more than 60% of its initial velocity during the flight to target. This velocity loss affected not just the bullet's energy on impact, but also its stability and trajectory consistency. Sarah had spent weeks studying the complex physics of projectile drag at extended range. She had learned that bullet stability became increasingly critical as velocity decreased. A bullet that was perfectly stable at close range might begin to tumble or wobble as it slowed down, dramatically affecting accuracy. This was one reason why extreme long-range shooting required specialized ammunition with carefully designed bullets that maintained stability even at reduced velocities. The custom bullets Sarah was using had been selected specifically for their ballistic coefficient, a measure of how efficiently they moved through air. Standard military bullets were designed for reliability and terminal effectiveness at conventional ranges, but extreme-range shooting required bullets optimized for accuracy and stability during extended flight times. Sarah's bullets featured boat-tail designs and precisely controlled manufacturing tolerances that helped them maintain consistent flight characteristics. As the bullet approached the target area, General Morrison noticed something different about this shot. Usually, failed shots at extreme range produced obvious misses, with bullet impacts visible in the dirt well short of or to the side of the target. But this time, he couldn't immediately see where the bullet had struck. His binoculars remained focused on the target area as he searched for signs of impact. Sarah continued to observe through her scope, her heart pounding as she waited for confirmation of her shot's result. She had experienced this same anxious moment hundreds of times over the past 18 months, usually followed by the disappointment of another miss. But something felt different about this attempt. Her pre-shot routine had been flawless, the environmental conditions were nearly ideal, and her sight picture had been perfect at the moment of trigger break. The silence on the firing line was broken by a voice from the target area. Staff Sergeant Martinez was positioned near the 4,000-meter target with a high-powered spotting scope and radio communication to the firing line. His voice crackled through the radio speaker. "Range control, I need confirmation on that last shot. I'm seeing what appears to be a hit on target." General Morrison's binoculars snapped to the target with renewed intensity. Through the powerful optics, he could make out the target's silhouette in the distance. What he saw made him lower his binoculars and look again, unwilling to trust his initial observation. After raising the binoculars for a second look, he turned to Sergeant Williams with an expression of complete disbelief. Sarah heard Martinez's radio transmission, but was afraid to believe what she had heard. After so many disappointments, she had learned to guard against false hope. She maintained her position behind the rifle, continuing to observe through her scope while waiting for official confirmation. The target appeared unchanged through her optics, but at 4,000 meters and maximum magnification, it was difficult to discern details clearly. Martinez's voice came through the radio again, this time with greater certainty. "Range control, I have confirmed impact on target. Repeat, confirmed hit on the 4,000-meter target. Center mass hit on the silhouette." The excitement in his voice was unmistakable, and his words carried across the suddenly silent firing line. The reaction was immediate and electric. Soldiers who had been skeptical observers moments before erupted in cheers and applause. Some ran towards Sarah's position, eager to congratulate her on an achievement that many had considered impossible. Others stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. General Morrison remained motionless for several seconds, his binoculars still focused on the distant target. He had spent months watching Sarah's failed attempts, growing increasingly frustrated with what he saw as wasted resources and time. He had been preparing to terminate the program after today's session, having already drafted the memo that would reassign Sarah to conventional duties. But now everything had changed. In the span of 4.5 seconds, Sarah had accomplished something that military experts worldwide had considered beyond the realm of practical possibility. She had successfully engaged a target at a range that exceeded the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history by nearly 500 meters. The implications for military tactics and capabilities were staggering. Sarah slowly lifted her head from the rifle scope, her hands trembling with adrenaline and emotion. 18 months of failure, criticism, and doubt had been erased by a single successful shot. She had proven that human determination, combined with precise calculation and perfect execution, could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The achievement was more than just a personal victory for Sarah. It represented a significant advancement in military capabilities and human performance. The ability to accurately engage targets at 4,000 meters would provide tactical advantages that could save lives and change the dynamics of military operations. Enemy forces would have to reconsider their movements and positioning, knowing that threats could emerge from previously inconceivable distances. Sergeant Williams approached Sarah with a mixture of pride and amazement. He had believed in her project when few others did, but even he had begun to question whether success was possible. "Outstanding shot, Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "You've just made military history." The technical aspects of Sarah's achievement were remarkable from multiple perspectives. The bullet had traveled nearly 2.5 miles, maintaining sufficient accuracy to strike a human-sized target. During its flight, the bullet had overcome wind resistance, gravity, and atmospheric variations that could have deflected it by dozens of meters. The precision required was almost incomprehensible to anyone unfamiliar with extreme long-range shooting. General Morrison finally approached Sarah's position, his expression serious despite the celebration around them. He understood immediately that this success would require significant documentation and verification. Claims of extreme long-range shooting achievements were often met with skepticism, and official confirmation would require careful documentation of conditions, equipment, and procedures. "Mitchell," the general said, his voice carrying a tone of respect that hadn't been present in their previous conversations. "That was an exceptional shot. But we need to verify everything before we can document this officially. I want complete records of today's conditions, equipment specifications, and ammunition details. If this achievement is confirmed, it will have implications far beyond this training range." Sarah nodded, understanding the importance of proper documentation. She had kept detailed records of her training program, including unsuccessful attempts and the gradual improvements in her technique and equipment. Today's success represented the culmination of a systematic approach to solving an extremely complex problem, and every aspect needed to be recorded for future reference and replication. The celebration continued around them, but Sarah's mind was already moving beyond the immediate achievement. She understood that hitting the target once was just the beginning. To demonstrate that extreme long-range shooting was a practical military capability rather than a lucky accident, she would need to prove repeatability under various conditions. Martinez's voice came through the radio once more. Range control, I'm documenting the impact location and taking photographs for official records. The bullet struck approximately 2 inches left of center mass, well within the target area. This is confirmed as a successful engagement at 4,000 meters. The precision of the hit was almost as remarkable as the distance itself. At 4,000 meters, a deviation of just 2 inches represented accuracy that bordered on the miraculous. Considering all the variables that could affect bullet flight at extreme range, the shot had been essentially perfect. General Morrison pulled out his notebook and began documenting the details of the morning's session. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, ammunition specifications, and equipment configuration all needed to be recorded. This information would be crucial for analyzing the shot and potentially replicating the achievement under similar conditions. The implications of Sarah's success extended far beyond military applications. The engineering advances in ammunition, rifle modifications, and ballistic calculation that had made the shot possible could benefit civilian long-range shooting sports and hunting applications. The systematic approach Sarah had developed for extreme-range shooting could become a training model for other specialized military units. But, perhaps most importantly, Sarah's achievement represented something fundamental about human potential and determination. She had faced 18 months of failure, criticism, and mounting pressure to abandon her goal. Many people had told her that what she was attempting was impossible, that she was wasting time and resources on a futile pursuit. Yet she had persevered, continuing to refine her technique, improve her equipment, and perfect her understanding of the complex factors affecting extreme long-range shooting. She had transformed repeated failures into learning opportunities, using each miss to better understand the variables that govern success at such distances. As the excitement on the firing line began to settle, Sarah remained focused on the larger picture. One successful shot had validated her approach and silenced her critics, but it also raised new questions and challenges. How consistently could such shots be made? What environmental conditions were required for success? Could other shooters replicate her achievement? The answers to these questions would determine whether her success represented a breakthrough in military capabilities or simply an extraordinary individual achievement. But, for now, Sarah Mitchell had accomplished something that most people considered impossible, and her name would be recorded in military history as the soldier who extended the boundaries of human accuracy to previously unimaginable distances. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's historic shot was a whirlwind of activity, documentation, and verification procedures. General Morrison had immediately ordered a complete lockdown of the firing range to preserve evidence and ensure proper documentation of what could be the most significant advancement in long-range shooting capabilities in decades. The target would need to be photographed from multiple angles, measured precisely, and examined by ballistics experts to confirm the achievement. Within hours of the confirmed hit, word of Sarah's accomplishment had reached the highest levels of military command. Colonel Peterson, who had been pressuring General Morrison to terminate the program just days earlier, called for a complete briefing on the morning's events. The tone of his conversation with the general had changed dramatically from skeptical cost-cutting to intense interest in the tactical implications of extreme long-range engagement capabilities. General Morrison, Colonel Peterson had said during their afternoon phone conference, if Specialist Mitchell has actually achieved a confirmed hit at 4,000 meters, we need to understand everything about how this was accomplished. This could represent a fundamental shift in our operational capabilities and threat assessment protocols. I'm authorizing whatever resources you need to document and potentially replicate this achievement. The military's interest in Sarah's success extended far beyond simple record-keeping. Modern military operations increasingly involved engagements at extended ranges, where the ability to neutralize threats from extreme distances could provide decisive tactical advantages. Urban environments often created situations where conventional engagement ranges were insufficient to maintain force protection while accomplishing mission objectives. Sarah found herself at the center of intense scrutiny as military experts from various specialties arrived to analyze her achievement. Ballistics engineers wanted to examine her ammunition and rifle modifications. Meteorologists studied the atmospheric conditions during her successful shot. Training specialists analyzed her shooting technique and preparation methods. Even military psychologists were interested in understanding the mental aspects that allowed her to persist through 18 months of failure. The technical analysis of Sarah's shot revealed just how remarkable her achievement had been. The bullet had maintained sufficient energy and stability to create a clean hole in the target material, indicating that it had arrived with enough velocity to be tactically effective. This was crucial information, as hitting a target meant nothing if the bullet lacked sufficient energy to be useful in a real-world engagement scenario. Ammunition specialists were particularly interested in Sarah's custom load development. The precision manufacturing techniques she had employed, working with the base's ammunition experts, had produced rounds that exceeded military specifications for consistency and accuracy. Each component had been measured and sorted to tolerances typically reserved for scientific instruments rather than military ammunition. The bullet weights varied by less than 1/10 of a grain, a level of consistency that required individual weighing and sorting of hundreds of projectiles. The powder charges were measured using laboratory-scale precision equipment, ensuring that each round produced identical velocities. Even the cartridge cases had been sorted by weight and internal volume to eliminate variables that could affect performance. These manufacturing techniques were expensive and time-consuming, raising questions about the practical implementation of extreme long-range capabilities. Military ammunition production emphasized reliability and cost-effectiveness over the precision manufacturing that Sarah's achievement required. Scaling up production of such precision ammunition would require significant investments in equipment and quality control procedures. The rifle modifications that had enabled Sarah's success were equally sophisticated. The standard military sniper rifle had been transformed into a precision instrument capable of accuracy at previously unimaginable distances. The barrel had been replaced with a heavy contour match-grade design that maintained consistency over extended shooting sessions. The trigger mechanism had been adjusted to provide a crisp, consistent break that eliminated variables in shot timing. Most significantly, the scope and mounting system had been upgraded with specialized components designed for extreme-range shooting. The elevation adjustment range had been increased to accommodate the massive trajectory adjustments required for 4,000-meter shots. The reticle system included ballistic calculation features that helped Sarah account for the complex variables affecting bullet flight at extreme range. But perhaps the most important factor in Sarah's success was her systematic approach to learning from failure. Over 18 months of unsuccessful attempts, she had developed an increasingly sophisticated understanding of the factors affecting extreme long-range shooting. Each missed shot had been analyzed, environmental conditions recorded, and adjustments made to her technique or equipment. Sarah had created detailed logs of every practice session, recording wind conditions, temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, and the results of each shot attempt. This data had allowed her to identify patterns and gradually refine her understanding of how environmental factors affected bullet trajectory at extreme range. The scientific approach she had taken transformed what could have been random attempts into a systematic learning process. The mental aspects of Sarah's achievement were equally important. Extreme long-range shooting required absolute confidence in calculations and equipment, combined with the ability to execute perfect technique under pressure. Sarah had developed mental training routines that helped her maintain focus during the extended setup time required for each shot attempt. Military psychologists studying Sarah's achievement were particularly interested in her ability to maintain motivation through repeated failures. Most people would have abandoned such a challenging goal after months of unsuccessful attempts. Sarah's persistence in the face of mounting criticism and pressure demonstrated psychological resilience that could be valuable in other military applications. The broader implications of Sarah's success were becoming clear as analysts studied the tactical advantages of extreme long-range engagement capabilities. Traditional military doctrine had been based on engagement ranges that were now proven to be conservative limitations rather than absolute boundaries. Enemy forces would need to reconsider their movement patterns and defensive positions, knowing that threats could emerge from distances previously considered safe. Intelligence analysts were already considering how extreme long-range capabilities might affect operational planning in various theaters. Urban environments where conventional engagement ranges were limited by buildings and obstacles could be transformed by the ability to engage targets from extreme distances. Mountain and desert environments, where long sight lines were available, could provide opportunities for extreme-range engagements that would fundamentally change tactical approaches. Training specialists were developing plans to test whether Sarah's achievement could be replicated by other shooters. The question of whether extreme long-range shooting was a unique individual capability or a teachable skill had significant implications for military force structure and training budgets. If the techniques could be taught to other soldiers, entire sniper units might be retrained for extreme-range operations. The equipment requirements for extreme long-range shooting were substantial, raising questions about cost-effectiveness and practical implementation. Sarah's rifle system, including all modifications and specialized components, represented an investment of nearly $50,000 per weapon. The ammunition costs were equally significant, with each precision round costing many times more than standard military ammunition. But military leaders were beginning to understand that the tactical advantages of extreme long-range capabilities might justify the increased costs. A single sniper capable of engaging targets at 4,000 meters could potentially replace entire fire teams in certain situations, providing force multiplication that could offset the higher equipment and training costs. International interest in Sarah's achievement was also growing rapidly. Foreign military attaches were requesting briefings on the technical aspects of the shot, while allies wanted to understand how extreme long-range capabilities might affect joint operations. The achievement had implications that extended far beyond American military forces, potentially changing global approaches to long-range engagement. General Morrison found himself in the unusual position of managing what had become a classified research program almost overnight. Sarah's training project, which had begun as an interesting experiment, had suddenly become a matter of national security interest. Access to information about her techniques and equipment was now restricted to personnel with appropriate security clearances. The general was also dealing with practical questions about Sarah's immediate future. Her success had generated requests from various military units that wanted to incorporate extreme long-range capabilities into their operations. Special operations forces were particularly interested, as were units operating in theaters where long engagement ranges were tactically advantageous. Sarah herself was experiencing a dramatic change in her military career trajectory. 18 months earlier, she had been a promising but conventional marksman pursuing an impossible goal against significant opposition. Now she was being consulted by senior military leaders about the development of new tactical doctrines and training programs. The transformation was both exciting and overwhelming. Sarah had always believed that her goal was achievable, but she hadn't fully considered the broader implications of success. Her personal quest to prove that extreme long-range shooting was possible had accidentally opened new possibilities for military operations and force structure. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Sarah's achievement was what it demonstrated about human potential and the power of systematic persistence. She had refused to accept conventional limitations, instead choosing to approach an apparently impossible problem with scientific methodology and unwavering determination. Her success proved that extraordinary achievements were possible when preparation, persistence, and opportunity aligned perfectly. The ripple effects of that single successful shot were continuing to expand throughout the military establishment. Training programs were being redesigned, equipment specifications were being rewritten, and tactical doctrines were being reconsidered. Sarah Mitchell had accomplished more than just hitting a distant target. She had fundamentally changed how the military thought about the boundaries of human capability and the potential for extending those boundaries through determined effort and systematic improvement. 3 months after her historic shot, Sarah Mitchell found herself standing in the Pentagon briefing room, addressing a gathering of senior military officials, defense contractors, and international observers. The woman who had once been dismissed as obsessed with an impossible goal was now recognized as a pioneer in extreme long-range engagement capabilities. Her achievement had fundamentally altered military thinking about the boundaries of human accuracy and the potential for extending those boundaries through systematic innovation. The briefing room was filled with generals, colonels, and civilian defense experts who wanted to understand how Sarah's breakthrough could be implemented across the military. Her presentation covered not just the technical aspects of the record-breaking shot, but the systematic approach she had developed for solving apparently impossible problems through persistent effort and scientific methodology. General Morrison, who had once been her harshest critic, was now one of her strongest advocates. He had been promoted and assigned to lead the newly created Extreme Range Engagement Program, which was developing training curricula and equipment standards for implementing Sarah's techniques across multiple military units. The general who had almost terminated her project was now overseeing its expansion into a major military capability. Ladies and gentlemen, General Morrison began his introduction. 6 months ago, I was prepared to shut down Specialist Mitchell's project as an expensive failure. Today, I'm here to brief you on what has become one of the most significant advances in small arms capabilities in decades. The techniques and systematic approach that Specialist Mitchell developed have applications that extend far beyond long-range shooting. Sarah's presentation included detailed analysis of the 18 months of failed attempts that had preceded her success. Rather than viewing those failures as wasted time and resources, military analysts now understood them as essential components of a learning process that had produced revolutionary capabilities. Each missed shot had contributed to the systematic understanding that made the eventual success possible. The data from Sarah's training program had been analyzed by teams of experts who found patterns and insights that applied to other challenging military problems. Her systematic approach to learning from failure and gradually improving performance had been adopted as a model for other high-risk, high-reward research projects. The methodology she had developed was proving valuable in areas ranging from aviation training to complex weapons systems development. International interest in Sarah's achievement had grown exponentially as foreign militaries realized the strategic implications of extreme long-range capabilities. Several allied nations had requested training exchange programs to learn the techniques that enabled such remarkable accuracy at unprecedented distances. The diplomatic and military relationships created by sharing this knowledge were strengthening international cooperation in defense research and development. But the most significant impact of Sarah's success was the change in military culture regarding impossible goals and innovative thinking. Her story had become an inspiration for soldiers and researchers throughout the military establishment who were working on challenging problems that others considered unsolvable. The woman who had persisted through 18 months of failure had proven that extraordinary achievements were possible when determination was combined with systematic effort. The technical replication of Sarah's achievement had proven more challenging than initially expected. While several other shooters had managed successful hits at 4,000 meters under ideal conditions, consistency remained elusive. Sarah's combination of technical expertise, mental discipline, and intuitive understanding of extreme-range shooting appeared to be rare and difficult to replicate through conventional training methods. This finding had led to increased focus on identifying and developing soldiers with exceptional potential for extreme long-range shooting. Selection criteria were being developed to identify candidates who possessed the combination of technical aptitude, mental resilience, and dedication required for mastering such demanding skills. Sarah had become the prototype for a new category of military specialist. The ammunition and equipment innovations that had enabled Sarah's success were being refined and standardized for broader military use. Defense contractors were developing production methods that could provide precision ammunition at reasonable costs, while maintaining the quality standards required for extreme range accuracy. The rifle modifications and scope systems were being engineered for mass production and field maintenance. Training facilities specifically designed for extreme long-range shooting were under construction at multiple military bases. These facilities included extended firing ranges, environmental monitoring equipment, and specialized targets designed to test accuracy at unprecedented distances. The infrastructure required to train soldiers in Sarah's techniques represented a significant investment in expanding military capabilities. Sarah had been assigned to lead the development of training curricula for extreme long-range shooting programs. Her experience with systematic skill development and learning from failure was being transformed into instructional materials that could teach others to achieve similar results. The personal journey that had been driven by individual obsession was becoming an institutional capability. The psychological aspects of Sarah's achievement had proven as important as the technical innovations. Military psychologists studying her success had identified mental training techniques that improved performance under high-pressure situations. The methods Sarah had developed for maintaining confidence through repeated failures were being incorporated into training programs for various high-stress military specialties. General Morrison's final evaluation of Sarah's project had been completely rewritten from his initial assessment. The memo that would have terminated her program had been replaced with recommendations for significant expansion and resource allocation. The general who had once questioned the value of pursuing impossible goals was now advocating for increased investment in innovative research programs. Specialist Mitchell's achievement demonstrates that our assumptions about human limitations may be more conservative than necessary, General Morrison wrote in his final report. The systematic approach she developed for extending performance boundaries has applications throughout our organization. We should encourage rather than discourage soldiers who are willing to pursue seemingly impossible goals through disciplined effort and scientific methodology. Sarah's story had also influenced military recruiting and retention efforts. Her achievement had become a powerful example of how individual determination and military support could combine to produce extraordinary results. Young people considering military careers were inspired by the possibility of participating in groundbreaking research and pushing the boundaries of human capability. The tactical doctrine changes resulting from Sarah's success were still being developed and tested. Military strategists were exploring how extreme long-range capabilities could be integrated into various operational scenarios, from urban warfare to conventional battlefield engagements. The ability to accurately engage targets at 4,000 meters was creating new possibilities for force protection and mission accomplishment. Training exchange programs with allied militaries were expanding the international impact of Sarah's techniques. Foreign soldiers were learning the systematic approach she had developed while sharing their own innovations in related fields. The international cooperation created by sharing extreme long-range shooting techniques was strengthening military partnerships and advancing collective defense capabilities. Sarah's personal transformation from dismissed dreamer to military innovation leader reflected the broader changes her achievement had created throughout the military establishment. Organizations that had once discouraged pursuit of seemingly impossible goals were now actively seeking soldiers willing to challenge conventional limitations. The culture that had almost ended her project was being transformed by the results it had ultimately produced. The legacy of Sarah's 18 months of failure and eventual success extended far beyond the specific achievement of hitting a target at 4,000 meters. She had demonstrated that systematic persistence could overcome apparently impossible obstacles, that innovative thinking could produce revolutionary capabilities, and that individual determination could change institutional perspectives on human potential. Looking back at the morning when she had finally achieved her goal, Sarah understood that the successful shot had been just the beginning rather than the end of her journey. The real achievement was the systematic approach she had developed for solving complex problems and the institutional changes that approach had created throughout the military. General Morrison, reflecting on the complete transformation of his assessment of Sarah's project, had learned valuable lessons about leadership and the importance of supporting innovative thinking even when success seemed unlikely. The general who had almost terminated the program that produced one of the most significant military advances in decades had become an advocate for encouraging rather than discouraging ambitious goals. The ripple effects of that single successful shot continued to expand throughout the military and beyond. Training programs based on Sarah's techniques were being implemented across multiple services. Equipment innovations inspired by her requirements were improving capabilities in various fields. Most importantly, the cultural shift toward encouraging innovative thinking and supporting ambitious goals was changing how the military approached challenging problems. Sarah Mitchell had set out to prove that a seemingly impossible shot could be made through determination and systematic effort. In achieving that goal, she had accomplished something far more significant. She had demonstrated that human potential could be extended through disciplined effort, that institutional barriers to innovation could be overcome through persistent results, and that individual achievements could transform organizational culture. The woman who had faced 18 months of criticism for pursuing an impossible dream had proven that the impossible was simply the not yet attempted. Her story had become inspiration for soldiers, researchers, and innovators throughout the military who were working to push the boundaries of what was considered achievable. The shot that silenced the general had spoken volumes about the power of human determination and the potential for extraordinary achievement through systematic persistence. In the end, Sarah's greatest achievement was not hitting a target at 4,000 meters, remarkable as that was. Her greatest achievement was proving that the boundaries of human capability were more flexible than most people believed, and that those boundaries could be extended through the combination of unwavering determination, systematic effort, and the the courage to pursue goals that others considered impossible. She had transformed failure into learning, criticism into motivation, and impossible dreams into revolutionary reality.